Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped off the transport shuttle. The journey from Earth had taken 3 weeks, and he was ready to stretch his legs properly. He grabbed his old military duffel bag and walked down the ramp into what looked like the most beautiful space station he'd ever seen. The walls seemed to glow with a soft blue light, and everything curved in smooth, flowing lines. Other cadets were already gathered in the main hall, and Jake's jaw dropped when he saw them. Some looked like tall, thin people made of glass, their skin so clear he could almost see through it. Others looked like they were carved from living crystal, with sharp edges that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. "Holy cow," Jake whispered to himself. He'd seen pictures during his briefing back on Earth, but seeing alien species in person was something else entirely. A creature that looked like it was made of flowing silk approached him. When it spoke, its voice sounded like beautiful music, like someone playing tiny bells in perfect harmony. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy," the being said, moving with grace that made professional dancers look clumsy. "You must be our human representative. I am Instructor Veltar." Jake tried to nod respectfully, but the moment he took a step forward, something felt completely wrong. His knees buckled, and he stumbled sideways like he was drunk. His stomach lurched as if he was falling, even though his feet were on solid ground. "Whoa!" Jake grabbed the nearest wall to steady himself. Around him, all the other cadets moved like they were floating through water, smooth and effortless. Jake felt like he was trying to walk while wearing springs on his feet. Several of the crystal-looking cadets made sounds like wind chimes tinkling, which Jake figured was probably laughter. The glass-skinned ones just stared at him with their huge, glowing eyes. "Are you injured?" Veltar glided over to him, and Jake could hear real concern in that musical voice. "Do you require immediate medical assistance?" Jake's face turned red. Great first impression, he thought. Fall flat on your face in front of everyone on your first day. "No, sir, I'm fine," Jake said, trying to stand up straight. "It's just, is there something wrong with the gravity here? It feels really weird, like it's way too light." The musical chiming from the crystal cadets stopped abruptly. Even the glass-skinned ones seemed to lean forward with interest. Veltar pulled out a small device that looked like a tablet computer and checked it twice. "The gravitational field is set to standard comfortable parameters," Veltar said slowly. "0.3 of your homeworld's gravitational pull. This is a level at which all civilized species can function safely and comfortably." Jake blinked. 0.3? That's like 1/3 of normal gravity. "Normal?" One of the crystal beings spoke up, its voice sounding like someone tapping on glass. "That would be impossibly crushing for most species. Perhaps the human requires medical evaluation," Veltar suggested gently. "The journey may have affected your inner ear or balance systems." Jake wanted to argue, but he was still swaying like he was on a boat. "Okay, sure. Maybe that's a good idea." 20 minutes later, Jake found himself lying on what looked like a medical bed made of the same glowing material as the walls. Dr. Zent, who reminded Jake of a 7-foot-tall seahorse with hands, was staring at a holographic display with what Jake assumed was confusion. "This cannot be correct," Dr. Zent muttered, his voice gurgling like he was talking underwater. "Run the bone density scan again." A beam of soft light passed over Jake's body 3 times. Each time, Dr. Zenta's large, fish-like eyes grew wider. "Young human," Dr. Zent said finally, "your skeletal structure is unlike anything in our medical databases. Your bones are incredibly dense, almost like they're designed to withstand enormous pressure." Jake shrugged. "My doctor back home said I had strong bones. Good for playing football." "Football?" Dr. Zent consulted his medical database. "A sport involving repeated high-impact collisions? For recreation?" "Yeah, it's pretty fun. Good exercise." Dr. Zent made a note on his chart with what looked like a tentacle. "And your cardiovascular system appears to be engineered for extreme performance. Your heart is incredibly powerful, and your blood carries oxygen with remarkable efficiency." "Is that bad?" Jake asked, starting to worry. Maybe the space travel had messed him up somehow. "Not bad," Dr. Zent said slowly, "but highly unusual. It's as if your entire physiology is designed for survival in a much harsher environment than any civilized world would provide. Jake sat up on the medical bed, still feeling like he might float away at any moment. Doc, I feel fine. Back home, this place just feels like there's not enough weight to anything. Dr. Zenth made several more notes. I am going to recommend that you begin with modified training protocols until you adjust to our standard environmental conditions. As Jake left the medical bay, he noticed other cadets whispering and staring at him. He caught bits of their conversations in languages he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. They thought he was weird. Jake sighed and headed toward the dormitory, bouncing slightly with each step like an astronaut on the moon. This was going to be a long few months. 3 weeks had passed since Jake arrived at the academy, and he was starting to realize that fitting in wasn't going to be as easy as he'd hoped. The other cadets had begun giving him strange looks, and he often caught them whispering about him when they thought he wasn't listening. Every morning, while the other students headed to the recreation center for their light exercise routines, Jake found himself drawn to Environmental Chamber 7. The sign outside read, Extreme Condition Simulator. Emergency training only in several alien languages, but to Jake, it was the only place on the entire station where he felt somewhat normal. There he goes again, whispered Lisa Parker, one of the crystalline Zephyri cadets. Her body looked like it was carved from purple gemstone, and when she spoke, it sounded like someone gently tapping on glass. What's he doing in there this time? A small group of cadets gathered around the observation window. Inside the chamber, Jake was running on a treadmill that looked like it was made of the same glowing material as everything else on the station. The digital readouts showed conditions that made several of the watching aliens step back nervously. .8 gravity, read Mike Johnson, an Aquarian cadet whose skin was blue-green and slightly wet-looking. His gills fluttered anxiously as he spoke. And 30 degrees temperature. That's nearly lethal conditions. But Jake looked completely comfortable. He wasn't even breathing hard as he ran, and there was a small smile on his face like he was enjoying himself. His running form was smooth and steady, nothing like the careful, measured movements the other species had to use in even mildly challenging conditions. How long has he been in there? Asked another cadet, this one from a species that looked like living shadow with bright yellow eyes. 2 hours, Lisa replied, checking her wrist of ice. Yesterday it was 3 hours. Last week he spent an entire afternoon in there. The watching cadets exchanged worried glances. Most of them could only survive in that chamber for minutes, and even then only with protective gear. Jake was in there wearing nothing but standard academy workout clothes. Later that day at lunch, Jake sat at his usual spot near the big window that looked out into space. The station's cafeteria served food that was supposed to be suitable for all species, which mostly meant it was pretty bland and safe. Jake had learned to bring his own seasoning from Earth. He pulled out a small container from his pocket and sprinkled what looked like tiny white crystals over his meal. The motion was casual, automatic, like someone adding pepper. Mike Johnson, who happened to be sitting at the next table, nearly choked on his liquid lunch. Jake, stop. Don't eat that. Jake looked up, confused, his fork halfway at his mouth. What's wrong? That's pure sodium chloride. Mike's gills were fluttering in panic. That's an industrial cleaning agent. It'll burn right through your digestive system. Jake looked down at the white crystals on his food, then back at Mike. It's just salt, man. To make things taste better? Salt. Mike's large. Fish-like eyes bulged. You mean you deliberately consume a corrosive chemical for pleasure? Corrosive? Jake laughed. Dude, it's table salt. Everyone uses it back home. My mom puts it on everything. By now, other cadets at nearby tables had stopped eating to listen. Jake could see the horror in their expressions, but he couldn't understand why they looked so frightened. Your species consumes industrial chemicals as food enhancement? Asked Kate Thompson, one of the graceful Etherian cadets. Her voice sounded like a gentle breeze, but there was clear distress in it. It's not industrial chemicals, Jake protested. It's just salt, sodium chloride. It's totally normal foodstuff. The cafeteria had gone quiet except for the soft humming of the station systems. Jake felt dozens of alien eyes staring at him as he sat there with his salted meal. I think I'm going to eat somewhere else, he muttered, picking up his tray. The real shock came 2 days later during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. The academy regularly ran acceleration drills to prepare cadets for combat maneuvers, but they were always carefully controlled. The artificial gravity would increase slightly, and cadets would practice moving under the additional stress. Jake was walking down Corridor C when the emergency alarms suddenly started blaring. Red lights flashed, and a computerized voice announced in multiple languages that there was a system malfunction. Within seconds, Jake felt the familiar sensation of normal gravity returning. Around him, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. Cadets who had been walking normally suddenly collapsed to the floor. Others pressed themselves against the walls, gasping and crying out in pain. The graceful Etherians, who normally seemed to float as they moved, were pinned to the deck like they were being crushed. Jake looked around in confusion. The gravity felt fine to him, actually better than it had in weeks. Without thinking, he started moving toward the nearest group of struggling cadets. "Help!" gasped Kate Thompson. Her normally ethereal form was pressed flat against the floor, and she could barely lift her head. "Can't move?" Jake knelt down next to her, easily supported her weight as he helped her sit up against the wall. She felt incredibly light in his arms, like she was made of paper. "How are you doing this?" she whispered, staring at him with wide, glowing eyes. "How are you even standing?" "Standing." Jake looked around at the chaos in the corridor. Cadets from a dozen different species were lying on the floor, some unconscious, others barely conscious. "I'm just walking. This is normal gravity." "Normal?" Kate's voice was barely audible. "This is 8/10 gravitational force. It's crushing us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine as he realized what was happening. While his classmates were being crushed by what felt like normal conditions to him, he was moving around like nothing had changed. In fact, he felt more energetic than he had since arriving at the academy. He spent the next hour helping the medical teams carry unconscious cadets to the infirmary, moving easily through corridors that had become death traps for everyone else. And with each trip, he saw the looks of fear and amazement in the eyes of those who were still conscious. For the first time since leaving Earth, Jake began to understand that he might not just be different. He might be something the galaxy had never encountered before. Jake was sound asleep in his dormitory when the lights suddenly started flashing red and a horrible shrieking alarm filled the air. He rolled out of bed, instantly awake, his military training from Earth kicking in automatically. The digital clock on his wall showed 3:47 a.m. station time. Emergency protocol activated. Announced the station's computer voice in multiple languages. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Jake quickly pulled on his uniform and stepped out into the corridor, expecting to see other cadets rushing to their assigned positions. Instead, what he found made no sense at all. The hallway was filled with bodies. His roommate, Steve Chun, a crystalline Zephyrite, was lying motionless near their door. His normally sharp, geometric features looked crushed somehow, like someone had tried to compress his crystal structure. Down the hall, Jake could see other cadets collapse against the walls or sprawled on the floor. "Steve." Jake knelt down next to his roommate, checking for signs of life. Steve's eyes were open, but he could barely focus them. When he tried to speak, only a weak whistle came out, like air escaping from a broken wind chime. Jake felt a strange sensation as he stood up. For the first time since arriving at the academy, his body felt right. The weird floating feeling was gone. His feet felt solid on the deck, and his muscles responded normally when he moved. It was like someone had finally turned the gravity back on. But if he felt normal, why was everyone else collapsed? He started moving down the corridor, checking on other cadets. Most were unconscious, but a few were still awake, though barely. Their breathing was shallow and labored, like they were struggling under enormous weight. "Help!" gasped Rachel Foster, one of the Etherian cadets who normally floated gracefully through the halls. Now she was pinned flat against the floor, her translucent skin looking gray and sickly. "Can't breathe." Jake scooped her up easily. She felt incredibly light, almost weightless, even though the gravity felt perfectly normal to him. As he carried her toward the medical bay, He passed viewport windows and noticed something else strange. The station's exterior lights were brighter than usual, and he could see maintenance robots moving erratically outside, like they were struggling with the same problems affecting everyone else. The medical bay was chaos. Dr. Zenth, the seahorse-like chief medical officer, was slumped over his desk, his tentacle-like arms hanging limply. Other medical staff were on the floor, gasping for air. The life support monitors were all flashing red warnings. Jake gently placed Rachel on one of the medical beds and looked around for someone who could help her. When he realized all the medical staff were incapacitated, he started checking computer systems himself. The environmental controls were showing readings that looked normal to him, but apparently were killing everyone else on the station. Gravity, 1G, he read aloud from the main display. Temperature, 35 degrees Celsius. Oxygen level, 21%. Those numbers seemed fine to Jake. Actually, they seemed perfect. The temperature felt like a nice spring day back in Ohio, and the air felt rich and clean in his lungs. Over the next 2 hours, Jake became a one-man rescue operation. He moved through the station systematically, carrying unconscious cadets and crew members to the medical bays. He manually operated life support systems that the regular crew couldn't reach. He even climbed into maintenance shafts to repair damaged atmospheric processors, working in conditions that would have killed most species on the station. The strangest part was how good he felt. Instead of being exhausted by the emergency, Jake felt more energetic than he had since leaving Earth. His thinking was clearer, his reflexes were sharper, and his strength seemed enhanced. How? Dr. Zenth could barely whisper when Jake carried in another group of survivors. The doctor was lying on one of his own medical beds, connected to life support equipment. How are you still functioning? Jake set down Mike Johnson, the Aquarian cadet, and checked his pulse. I don't understand what happened. Document. Everything just feels normal now. Actually better than normal. Dr. Zenda's large eyes focused on Jake, what looked like amazement and terror combined. Normal? These conditions are lethal for most species. It took 6 hours for the engineering teams to restore the station's environmental systems to safe levels. As soon as they did, Jake immediately felt that weird floating sensation return. The air seemed thin and lifeless, and the temperature dropped to what felt like a cold winter day. The emergency debriefing was held in the main conference room, with most of the senior staff still connected to portable life support units. Commander Thexville, a tall being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and tree, stared at Jake with eyes that seemed to see him differently than before. Cadet Miller, the commander's voice was weak but steady. You're telling us that the conditions during the emergency felt normal to you? Jake nodded. Yes, sir. Maybe a little cool for summer weather, but pretty comfortable. Actually, it was really nice. Peaceful. Peaceful? Commander Thexville leaned forward. You found lethal environmental conditions peaceful? Well, yeah, Jake said, confused by the question. I mean, there were no storms, no earthquakes, no dangerous animals running around. Really calm compared to most days back home. The room went completely silent. Jake could hear the soft humming of the life support machines and the whisper of the air recycling systems. Dangerous animals? Dr. Zenta's voice was barely audible. Jake shrugged. You know, the usual stuff. Bears, mountain lions, wolves. Sometimes you get unlucky and run into something aggressive, but mostly they leave you alone if you're smart about it. The assembled staff exchanged looks that Jake couldn't interpret, but something in their expressions made him uncomfortable. It was like they were seeing him for the first time, and what they saw frightened them. Within hours of the environmental system failure at Harmony Station, emergency signals were flying across the galaxy faster than light itself. The incident report landed on desks at Galactic Command like a bomb, and within minutes, Admiral Quetzon was staring at his screen with growing disbelief. Get me everything we have on the human homeworld, he barked at his aide, a nervous creature that looked like a walking flower with too many eyes. I want deep scans, atmospheric analysis, biological surveys, everything. Sir, the aide's voice sounded like rustling leaves. Our initial contact protocols only required basic habitability confirmation. We have limited data on Terra 3. Then get me more. The Admiral's voice echoed through Command Center. Send our best long-range survey probes immediately. Priority 1 clearance. The probe launch happened 6 hours later. 3 of the most advanced survey vessels in the Galactic Fleet were dispatched toward a small yellow star that the humans call Sol. Each probe was equipped with sensors that could analyze a planet from several light years away, technology that had mapped thousands of worlds across a galaxy. Back at Harmony Station, Jake was completely unaware of the panic he had caused. He spent his time visiting classmates in the medical bay, bringing them snacks and trying to cheer them up. Most of them were still recovering from what the doctors were calling severe gravitational trauma syndrome, though they seemed more interested in staring at Jake than talking to him. "How are you feeling, Steve?" Jake asked his roommate, who was still connected to several monitoring devices. Steve's crystal structure had regained some of its sharp edges, but his voice was still weak. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure, man. What's it like on your home planet?" "Really?" Jake sat down in the chair next to Steve's bed. "It's pretty nice, actually. Green grass, blue skies, lots of open space. My hometown is right next to this big lake where we used to go fishing every weekend." "Fishing?" "Yeah, catching fish to eat. It's relaxing." Steve's crystalline features seemed to shiver. "You hunt aquatic creatures for food?" "Hunt? I guess, sort of. Though fish aren't really dangerous or anything. Well, except for sharks, but you don't usually see those in lakes." "Sharks." Jake realized he was making things worse somehow, but he wasn't sure why. "Never mind. The point is, Earth is a pretty peaceful place. Nothing like the stories you hear about some of the frontier worlds." 3 days after the probes launched, the data started coming back. Admiral Kazan had called an emergency meeting of the Galactic Defense Council. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the massive conference chamber on Central Station. The Admiral stood before a huge holographic display, showing the probe readings. His hands were shaking slightly as he activated the presentation. "Colleagues," he began, his voice unsteady, "what you are about to see challenges everything we know about habitable worlds and the species that can survive on them." The first image showed Earth from space, a blue and green marble hanging in the blackness. It looked beautiful, almost inviting. "Initial visual scan shows a seemingly pleasant world," the Admiral continued. "But the detailed analysis reveals something far more disturbing." The display changed to show atmospheric readings. Several council members gasped audibly. "Gravitational force, 1G, Admiral Kazan read. That's triple our established safe parameters for civilized species. Most of us would be crushed within minutes under such conditions." Counselor Vextal, representing the Etherian species, raised a delicate hand. "Admiral, surely there's an error in the readings?" "I thought so, too," the Admiral replied grimly. "We ran the scans 4 times. The results are consistent." He clicked to the next reading. "Atmospheric composition, 21% oxygen. That's an explosive range. The air itself is a fire hazard." The holographic display showed temperature readings next, and several council members actually stood up from their chairs in alarm. "Surface temperature variations range from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius," the Admiral continued. "These are conditions that would kill most of our species in hours, if not minutes." "And the weather systems?" asked another counselor. The Admiral's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Electrical storms generating billions of volts of energy. Rotating wind systems with speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. Seismic activity that can split continents." At that moment, a communication alert chimed softly. A holographic image appeared showing Lieutenant David Morrison, Earth's liaison officer for First Contact Protocols. He was sitting in what looked like a comfortable office, completely relaxed. "Admiral," David said cheerfully, "I got your priority message. Is there some kind of problem with our boy Jake?" The Admiral stared at the human on the screen. David looked perfectly normal, even friendly, but now Admiral Kazan was seeing him differently. This wasn't just another species representative. This was a being that had evolved to survive in conditions that could kill almost anything else in the galaxy. "Lieutenant Morrison," the Admiral's voice was carefully controlled, "we need to know more about your home world. How many humans currently inhabit Terra 3? Earth? About 8 billion at last count. Why do you ask? The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the air recycling systems humming in the walls. 8 billion. 8 billion creatures adapted to survive in what amounted to a death trap disguised as a planet. And they're all similar to Cadet Miller in terms of physical capabilities? David laughed. Jake? He's pretty average, actually. Maybe even a little on the soft side. To be honest, he's from the suburbs. Never really had to deal with serious outdoor survival situations. The Admiral felt his legs go weak. If Jake was considered soft by human standards, what were their soldiers like? Their athletes? Their survival experts? Lieutenant, the Admiral said slowly, we may need to have a much longer conversation about your species. David's expression grew more serious as he seemed to pick up on the tension in the room. Admiral, is there something we should be worried about? Admiral Kazan looked around at the faces of the Galactic Council, seeing his own fears reflected in their expressions. In all their centuries of space exploration and first contact protocols, they had never encountered anything like this. No, Lieutenant, he said finally, I think the worry is entirely on our end. 6 months had passed since the environmental disaster at Harmony Station, and Jake Miller had no idea that his name was now whispered in fear across half the galaxy. He stood in front of Training Room Alpha, adjusting the environmental controls with the casual ease of someone setting up a backyard barbecue. All right, everyone, gather around. Jake called out cheerfully to the 200 galactic military officers assembled before him. These weren't fresh cadets like his old classmates. These were hardened veterans, beings who had survived actual combat across dozens of star systems, species that had conquered worlds and fought in the vacuum of space. And every single one of them looked absolutely terrified. Today we're going to work on basic survival skills, Jake continued, completely missing the way several officers actually stepped backward. Nothing too challenging, just some fundamental exercises to build up your endurance. He tapped the environmental control panel, and the room's displays lit up with readings that made some of the assembled warriors actually whimper. We'll start simple. 10 push-ups in 1G gravity, followed by a light jog in 25-degree heat. Maybe some basic obstacle course work, if everyone's feeling up to it. Colonel Vexthal, a battle-scarred veteran from the Crystalline Wars, raised a shaking appendage. Instructor Miller, are you certain about those parameters? Perhaps we could begin with lighter conditions? Jake looked genuinely confused. Lighter? This is already pretty easy stuff, Colonel. Back home, this would be what we give the kids in elementary school. A ripple of horror went through the assembled officers. Elementary school children. Human children were trained under conditions that would kill most adult alien warriors. High above in the observation deck, Admiral Kazan watched through reinforced viewing windows alongside representatives from 12 different species. The viewing deck itself had been specially constructed with emergency life support systems, just in case Jake decided to demonstrate anything more strenuous. The human-designated Miller still has no comprehension of what he represents, does he? Asked Counselor Vextar, her ethereal form flickering with nervous energy. None whatsoever, Admiral Kazan replied, his voice heavy with a mixture of amazement and dread. Our intelligence reports indicate that most humans consider their homeworld to be quite pleasant and relaxing. What do they call our standard habitable worlds? Asked another council member. Vacation planets, the Admiral said quietly. They refer to our most comfortable worlds as places you go to rest and recover from stress. Down in the training room, Jake had begun demonstrating proper push-up form. He dropped to the floor and began performing the exercises with smooth, easy movements, breathing normally as if the crushing gravity were nothing more than a gentle breeze. Several officers collapsed just watching him. See? Nice and controlled, Jake said, popping back to his feet without even breathing hard. Remember, this is just basic fitness stuff. Nothing hardcore. Behind the viewing window, an aide approached Admiral Kazan nervously. The aide was from a species that looked like walking flowers, and his petals were visibly wilting from stress. Sir, the aide whispered, we've received a communication from the Human Diplomatic Corps. They're asking about cultural exchange programs. The Admiral felt his stomach drop. What kind of cultural exchange programs? They're suggesting something called camping trips on their homeworld. They say it would be a fun way for our species to experience authentic human recreation. Admiral Quezon actually grabbed the railing to steady himself. Camping trips. Humans wanted to invite alien dignitaries to spend recreational time on a planet that could kill them in minutes. Send an immediate response, the Admiral said, his voice carefully controlled. Express our gratitude for the invitation, but explain that we need more time to prepare proper safety protocols. How much time, sir? Several years, maybe decades. The political landscape across the galaxy had shifted dramatically in the past 6 months. What had begun as a galactic community offering aid and guidance to what they assumed was a primitive, newly spacefaring species had transformed into something entirely different. Trade negotiations that once focused on what advanced technologies they could share with the backward humans now centered on desperate attempts to ensure human friendship. Military strategists who had initially dismissed Earth as irrelevant were now creating entirely new threat assessment categories. The Galactic Defense Council had quietly reclassified humanity from developing civilization to something that roughly translated as approach with extreme caution and preferably not at all. Earth itself had been marked with warnings that made veteran space explorers choose alternate routes rather than pass anywhere near human space. Sir, another aide approached, this one looking like he might faint. The humans have sent additional cultural exchange proposals. They're suggesting something called hiking trips and outdoor adventure experiences. Through the observation windows, they could see Jake helping a fallen Aquarian officer to his feet with gentle care, completely unaware that his casual assistance was being recorded and analyzed by military experts as a demonstration of terrifying strength. What's our current diplomatic status with Earth? Asked Counselor Vextar. Full friendship treaties, Admiral Quezon replied. We've agreed to everything they've asked for. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, technology sharing, mutual defense pacts. Mutual defense pacts? We want to make absolutely certain that if anyone in the galaxy is foolish enough to threaten humanity, we are very clearly on their side. Down in the training room, Jake was wrapping up the session, still smiling and encouraging his students with the same friendly demeanor he'd shown since his first day at the academy. Great work today, everyone. He called out as medical teams quietly entered to assist the collapsed officers. Tomorrow we'll try some basic endurance exercises. Maybe a little light running, nothing too strenuous. The assembled veterans looked at each other with expressions of pure dread. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had feared the cold emptiness of space itself. The void between stars had represented the ultimate hostile environment, a place where nothing could survive. Now they realized they had discovered something far more terrifying in the vacuum of space, a species that had evolved in conditions so hostile that they considered the deadly void of space an improvement over staying home. And the worst part was that they were genuinely nice people.